Undiplomatic is an unscripted and unfiltered podcast hosted by Hyatt-Khan that will explore the intersection of business, politics and culture in Slovakia with a host of high-level guests across the spectrum telling their stories. Perhaps the most undiplomatic person in Slovakia, Lubos Blaha.
Such a controversial, divisive, combative figure. Talk to me about your childhood.
When I was 14 years old, I was punk and I was a rebel.
I also saw somewhere in your biography that you're a big football fan and you like Spurs. There was a player who played at Manchester City and at Liverpool, a guy called Mario Balotelli. He had a T-shirt that says, "Why always me?" He was always in trouble.
Oh yeah, I know.
And I was thinking about you. Maybe people don't see me as a Slovak, but I want to help the country. How do you feel that you're going to go and help pro-business the Slovakia in the future? And what are the opportunities that you think are going to come within this administration in the next 4 years?
We are not dreamers, but we want to have something like the typical welfare state or social state, like it was in continental Europe, in Germany or in France after the war. And that means also that the state will be strong in the economics.
We had the progressives on one side talking about civil issues, and then we have more established, let's say, parties who are talking about pensions, support for families. They're divided in two camps. Do you know what the cultural identity of Slovakia is?
In the West, is concentrating on the minority issues, human rights issues. This is counterproductive, I think. But it's about kind of national tradition in Slovakia, concentrating on community. And that's why the left-wing thinking in Slovakia is much more oriented towards economic equality, helping the poor.
In my latest episode of Undiplomatic, I'm to be joined by perhaps the most undiplomatic person in Slovakia, other than me, Lubos Blaha, a politician, an educator, an author, currently vice chairman of the National Council of the Slovak Republic, and long-standing member of the SMER Social Democrats Party. Dear Ľuboš, many thanks for joining me here today. There is a lot that I want to talk to you about, but where does one begin with such a controversial, divisive, combative figure? Ľuboš, many thanks for joining us here today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So hopefully I won't get cancelled for having this. Look, I had a lot of opinions. People have said to me, how can you do a podcast with Lubos Blaha? And I said, well, to be honest, to have the best types of conversations, you have to have them with everyone. Yeah. You don't get a liberal idea. You don't get a vision. You don't get a broad picture unless you speak to everybody. But I'm sure because you're such a controversial figure, that might boost my ratings. Anyway, maybe you're misunderstood. But I may say in all your communications with me, you have been very cordial, exceptionally polite. You're a very educated man. I heard we spoke a little bit off air as well. So maybe let's start at the beginning. Lubos Blaha, as a young boy. Talk to me about your childhood, how you got to where you are. Paint me a little picture. Doesn't have to be too long, but just get an idea.
Well, when I was 14 years old, I was punk. And I was, rebel. Still I am. And my father, he was left-wing, very left-wing, and he explained me many things, and he introduced me many good books from the left-wing circles. And then I started to be more Marxist, more socialist, and this is who I am still now. So I think it's a kind of legacy of my father, of my family, and of my childhood as well.
I also saw somewhere in your biography that you're a big football fan and you you like Spurs,
yeah.
Which is they're a London team. But it's funny because there was a player who played at Manchester City and at Liverpool, a guy called Mario Balotelli. I don't know if you remember him.
Yeah.
He had a T-shirt that says "Why always me?" So he was always in trouble.
Oh yeah, I know.
And I was thinking about you, especially when I was doing this.
Well, the thing is that I was a big fan when I was a child of Gary Lineker, and he was playing for Tottenham at the time when I was young. So that's why I like Tottenham. There is no politics in this, because I think Tottenham Hotspur is quite a corporation. It's not a very left thing, but still. Funny thing is that
Actually, it's been a traditionally Jewish club.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When Israeli ambassador was in my office, when I was the chairman of the European Affairs Committee, he told, "Oh, you are a fan of Tottenham? It's Israeli or Jewish community club." And I said, "I didn't know that." So it's not about politics. It's just about football. Sometimes you have to be apolitical,
And I don't know if you follow British politics recently. Gary Lineker has actually been in trouble because he made a comment about the Rwanda bill. I don't know if you've seen this, that we deport people in the United Kingdom, illegal migrants. We're trying to get rid of them, whether it's right or wrong, to Rwanda. And he said that this is inappropriate. And the BBC said that he's violating the terms of his contract saying that he shouldn't be speaking about these issues.
I heard about it. Yeah. But,
So interesting that you're a Spurs fan. I'm from Chelsea, even though I do not support Chelsea.
My father loved Chelsea, so I like Chelsea as well. But still, Tottenham is. I like it before even Sheffield Wednesday.
Sheffield
because
Wednesday.
Chris Waddle was playing there.
Yes.
But it was the time when they play for the first league.
Yeah.
Now they are
Actually, Chris Waddle was also at Spurs as well.
Yeah,
Waddle and Hoddle.
Yeah, exactly.
Those were that shows how old we are, Lubos.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, so fast forward to obviously your love of football is great. We spoke a little bit before. You're a very educated man, and maybe people forget this. You published over 10 or 11 books, I think, by now, and on various subjects. You're writing a book now on Che Guevara. But let's fast forward. So your father introduced you to Marxist ideology and left-wing thinking. What inspired you to become a politician? What inspired you to think, I want to do something that would help my country?
Well, when I think it was in a grammar school or in university, when there was the bombing of Yugoslavia, it was maybe the first trigger to make me activist and to be involved in politics. Before I was just an intellectual, of course, political intellectual, but still not a political activist. And the Iraqi war, the American invasion to Iraq, it was the second trigger. So I was starting to be on anti-imperialist positions. When Slovakia was trying to get into the NATO, I, together with Mr. Chmelar and Mr. Čarnogórsky, was trying to push for the referenda about this decision. And so it was when I was a young man, still outside the politics, but very active in these fields. And suddenly, when I started to be the advisor of the Speaker of the Parliament, Mr. Paška, it was 2006 and till 2010. I was involved in parliamentary politics, and then suddenly I started to be the member of, or not a member, at first not a member, but the politician of SMER. In 2012, I had a invitation to be on the candidate list of SMER Social Democracy. I became the chairman of the European Affairs Committee, and still more and more, vocal about my politics. I started to be quite popular in Slovakia in the left-wing circles, and this is where I'm now.
Interesting. There are loads of things that you said there that were interesting for me. First, NATO. Tell me your honest opinion, Slovakia is better to be with NATO or not?
Well, I can tell you just the official opinion of the party, because I am the representative of the party.
I get it.
I can tell you that we respect that Slovakia is the member state of the NATO, but we are very critical to NATO. It's very open. For example, the expansion of NATO is one of the reasons why there is the conflict on the Ukraine now, and we are very open in this. But still, as you said, in this constellation of powers, the leading figures of SMER, Slovak Social Democracy in general, think that the NATO is better option than the other options. And as regards my opinion, I will be silent now.
Okay, so very diplomatic. Even though the podcast is called Undiplomatic, but I appreciate that there are certain things that you cannot say. You can tell me off air, no problem. Another thing you mentioned there was anti-imperialism. You think there's a hypocrisy towards America, because when their invasion of Iraq for these weapons of mass destruction, there was no empirical data that there was there, but they control the global media narrative, and yet the world scorns Russia for their invasion in Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly.
In my opinion, rightly so. We should scrutinize Russia for their invasion in Ukraine. There's always a decision. Whether the expansion of NATO was a genuine threat, there's always a decision to go and harm lives. So my sentiments will always be there with the people of Ukraine, but my sentiments are also there for the people of Iraq. You think there's a hypocrisy in the global media?
It's a hypocrisy is one thing, but still is a difference. America or United States of America in the Bush times with Tony Blair's Britain, they made invasion to the country which was so far from their lands. There was no threat from Iraq. Even this lie about the mass destruction military, it was just a lie. But still, the difference is between Ukraine and Russia that Ukraine is on the border of Russia. It's a big border. There is a big history of this. It would be very similar, for example, to Cuba or to Mexico in the case of United States or Canada. If in Mexico is the country or the establishment when the Russians, for example, or Soviets in the times would give the armies and militaries, probably the response of the United States would be very, very rude.
Sure.
So this is the different situation. That's why we need to understand the Russians' positions, not because we want to follow them, but if we want to have a peace in Ukraine, we need to respect that there is a clash of interest. And the only way for me, as a man who really hate wars, is to find the solutions or compromises and to prevent the war. And there was a chance to prevent the war. If the expansion of NATO will not continue, if there is no...
So you believe we had 8 years that we could have fixed it even before?
Exactly. Maidan was the mistake.
Yeah.
The Odessa massacre was mistake. The massacres on the Donbass from the Ukraine, or even the neo-Nazis groups in the military of Ukraine, it was a mistake. And that's why we are where we are now.
We're all suffering though now. Inflation, energy crisis. The world is changed geopolitically. There's us versus them. I completely disagree with what you just said. But that's also okay. There's always a decision. You have a decision to make. Harming other people is a decision. I believe that the Russian Federation had an opportunity not to harm people.
I don't agree with them in this. This is all right, but still, probably both of us wants to stop this war
Big time.
And Ukrainians has no chance. This is our opinion. No chance to win this war. You can see this country offensive. It's a totally failure. Even you can read it in the Western newspapers and from Mr. Zaluzhny, who is not outsider in the Ukraine. So probably it was a mistake to make a war which you cannot win. I see the situation very similar to Verdun in First World War. Like many people are dying, and the front is exactly the same place. So why we are doing this? Why?
Honestly, I'm at a desperate place. I think the world is at a desperate place. We see what's happening in Palestine too. We see the threat that of Taiwan and China as a result. All of these conflicts get amplified, and everybody's afraid that their conflict is marginalized because of ongoing conflicts everywhere. I don't think the world is in a good place. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin mentioned the head of your party and the leader of Hungary in his speech. Coming back to Slovakia a little bit, there are lots of people that feel that there is pro-Russian sentiment ideologically, maybe with your party, maybe with the new coalition. But I'm thinking more along the lines as a cultural identity. I think we spoke about this before. Is there a lapse of a cultural identity? We had the progressives on one side talking about civil issues, talking about rights, equality, and all of these things. And then we have more established, let's say, parties who are talking about pensions, who are talking about support for families, who are talking about lunch money for kids, who are talking about all of the financial elements. And yet they're divided in two camps. I see this as a microcosm of the problem in Slovakia. Do you know what the cultural identity of Slovakia is?
Well, first of all, we are the left-wing party and the traditional left-wing party. We are not the left-wing party like it is maybe in Great Britain or in Belgium or Netherlands. The left maybe from the 60s or 70s in the West is concentrating on the minority issues, human rights issues, and these transsexuals and
But you marched in 2014.
Yeah. I think at the time when it was the marginal issue in Slovakia, it was quite okay. But now, when we are,
But you've changed your opinion?
I changed my opinion because I'm respectful to these people. But still, I cannot accept this ideology. Like, if Slovak people, we are traditional society, refuse this kind of ideology, why the West is pushing this ideology so much? This is counterproductive, I think. And
I think that goes back to the identity crisis.
Well, but in Slovakia,
what does traditional mean to you? That's this conservative word, traditional word, is linked to you mentioned it also, it's the Catholic, it's the church, it's these values, right or wrong? The sect is a secular state.
It's not about Catholicism. I'm atheist, for example. It's about a kind of national tradition in Slovakia, which is more concentrating on community. I mean, we are not individualist like the people in the West sometimes or in the Protestant countries. We are more community. And this is the reason why we are left-wing or why we are trying to help the others. It's not the reason like you have this Kantian or Rawlsian contractual, rationalism that you want to help every individual because it's rational. No, it's about the community, our communitarian arguments. And that's why the left-wing thinking in Slovakia is much more oriented towards the bread issues, like economic equality, like the helping the poor, like the fighting against the war and so on. So this is not the minority issues which are so important for us. And this is the difference between us and maybe kind of progressives in the West. And the progressive in Slovakia are mirroring the West.
Do you think maybe that's because the young generation in Slovakia particularly feel that they don't have an identity that relates to the past? Most politicians and most people that make the rules nowadays are still older. And they come from a generation where value systems were slightly different. We have younger people now who want to earn more money, who want to have a mortgage, who want to have a house that probably wasn't gifted to them in the like there were quite a lot in communist times. I understand the value of the communist system when it existed and the opportunities that presented. I also understand the negatives. It's a complicated scenario. But now you're seeing this clash as maybe not the Western ideology imposing on Slovak people, but maybe they're seeing, we want to do what they do like in Germany or in Britain or in France or in Spain or in Italy. We want to live a little bit like that. We want to have more money in our pockets. We want to have gay rights because it's just natural, not because it's an agenda. And you don't think that's the clash there?
Well, I think that this is the problem not only on Slovakia, but many, many countries in the Latin America, Africa, Asia, or many post-communist countries in the European Union. We had a different development than, for example, Germany or France after the war. After the Second World War, it was the issues of a welfare state in 50s and 60s also in your countries.
Sure.
But these issues are still important for us because we are poorer nation. And poorer nations, I mean also the Latin American countries, the Asia countries, than you are. Before you were imperialist countries, I mean especially the Western empires like Great Britain and France. And, the people or the not so powerful nations or peoples like Slovakia is, they are quite careful against these empires and against these former colonies. So sometimes we need to understand this idea of national liberation as still working in our minds. And this is the very big difference between us and, for example, British kind of left-wing thinking, because our left-wing thinking is also patriotic. It's a fight for national liberation, not only in the political sense, because we are liberated in political sense, but also in the economic sense.
Sure.
We are in the globalization, which is very neoliberal, which is quite capitalist, I would say turbo neoliberal. And this is something we are opposing. And that's, I think, totally legitimate for the left-wing thinking.
There's so many things that you said there that I actually agree with and quite a few that I disagree with. I like the notion of, I don't think there's any issue with nationalism. People should be proud of where they're, patriotism. Let me correct myself. Yeah. I don't have an issue with patriotism. Nationalism is always a little bit dangerous in my mind. Pro patria causes more problems than it cures. And recently the rhetoric in Slovakia has been, we put Slovakia's interests first, we put Slovakia, There's a lot of this being spoken in parliament and so forth, and in Europe as well. What does that mean in terms of, you said turbo neoliberal or neo-capital environment for I work at the Council of Slovak Exporters, and my sole job is to try and help the business environment for Slovak businesses. And they are struggling with a market being traditionally European. And they need to go into bigger markets. In fact, I should be made mayor of Stupava, but I'm a foreigner, so people are reluctant to see me as a help. I want nothing but good things for this country. In fact, my family is Slovak, my wife is Slovak, my kids are Slovak. I want to see this country prosper. Maybe people don't see me as a Slovak, and of course I'm not one, but I want to help the country. How do you feel that you're going to go and help pro-business for Slovakia in the future? And what are the opportunities that you think are going to come within this administration in the next 4 years?
Well, we are not knaves. We are not dreamers. Like, for example, like next week we will have kind of a revolution, a socialist revolution, as everything will change. No, nobody, even the radical leftists, people like I am, are not knaves or dreamers. But we want to have something like the typical welfare state or social state, like it was in continental Europe, in Germany, or in France after the war. And this is something which is totally legitimate. And that means also that the state will be strong in the economics. It will protect.
But you need to put money in the treasury. You need the budget to increase.
Yes, but we are going to make a kind of balance about we need to.
You can't just keep on helping people
yes, we need to
indiscriminately.
We need to protect workers or the employees, and we need to protect also our domestic industries. But we also need to cooperate with abroad companies. So this is normal. But well. Maybe you remember the speech of one communist leader in 1989. He warned the people, you will be the slaves in your own country if this revolution, velvet revolution, will come. And sometimes many people feel that this is the fact in Slovakia now, that they are working for the multinational or transnational corporations. They have, very bad positions, very bad incomes. In comparison, for example, with Germany or with Great Britain, and this is something unjust or unfair. They think like this. So
what if you take away Volvo, you take away Volkswagen, you take away Kia, you take away Peugeot, you take away Jaguar Land Rover, you take all of these away?
That's why I'm telling you that we are not radical. We are just, we have this stance, this position, ideological positions, but still we are pragmatic enough or realistic enough to know that the country needs also the foreign investments, but also the protection of domestic business, but especially the protection of the people. And this is something I think, what is a very, very big difference between what are the Western media are telling about us, that we are pro-Russian, we are communist, or we are something like extremist. But when they are talking about our acts, they need to respect that we are very pragmatic and realistic, because yes, we have our ideals, we have our dreams, but we are not going to be like fanatics or jihad or Taliban. So we, and especially Mr. Fico, is a very, very experienced prime minister, and he knows what to do. But still, we have our values, and we need to follow them. But maybe sometimes slower than it is possible.
So you're confident that in the next 3 to 4 years, the country is going to benefit from strong leadership, is going to benefit in a way that will help people get better jobs, get paid more. My concern here is that you look at average salaries, median salaries in Europe. I think Slovakia is at the lowest in the EU zone. Yeah. And there's a lot of talent here. And I see the talent here. And you think, well, how are we going to stop? How are we going to stop Lubos from going to do his job in France or Spain or Germany and get paid 5,000 euros a month instead of 1,000 euros here? How are we going to get these people affording mortgages and getting on the property ladder and then putting more money into the economy? And that's a challenge I think no administration has really fulfilled.
Well, I was devastated when I heard that Slovakia is the second poorest country in the European Union, and it was the result of the government of Mr. Matovič, Mr. Heger, and Mrs. Čaputová, because it was presidential government before. So I was devastated, and this is the fact. Our idea is to make a mixture of economic growth, which is going to be really, really protected by state, and the idea of welfare state. Is it something extremist? No. Our example, our influence is Sweden maybe, or France, or Germany. Is it something extremist in this?
No.
The only difference is, as I said, in these cultural issues, in these ethic issues. Slovakia is much more in cultural issues a traditional country. We don't want to do these sexual experiments. Well, also maybe in your country in 50s it was not the issue. Slovakia is in different.
You mentioned
different
that you were a punk. I grew up in the UK in the 80s, and we had punks and we had rockers and we had the burgeoning environment of the LGBT community. And then I grew up with it almost established. So it was never really an issue. It was unusual, but then it became commonplace. And for us, I think that I would like Slovakia to also reach that place where it's not a discussion, it's just bound in law. It becomes less of an issue and a circus and more of a fact that people should have the same rights, shared values, shared property, equal rights in terms of ownership.
To be honest, when you are in the middle class, or you are probably middle class, or maybe lower middle class, or upper middle class, something like this, okay? Me too, because I'm a politician and I have a bigger salary than many people around. But still, when you are a working class man, when you are day to day trying to solve to how to get the money for your family, and you are poor, and your priority is not the homosexuals. Your priority is not the liberty and human rights.
Agreed.
Your priority is the
agree.
bread.
But then let's also have that.
Yeah,
Instead of talking about it, let's also have that. It's like, okay, I can't afford to pay my fixing my car, but these guys should be able to buy a house together.
Please,
it's so simple.
We just want to have our own way. Maybe in 50 years, Slovak society will want this, but now we don't want. And this is something, in 90s, it started. In 90s, it was not before. In 80s, in 70s, even the libertarian movements was about the peace in Vietnam in 60s, peace against the armament and the nuclear war and so on. It was good ideals, I think. But suddenly in 90s, everything changed. Even Naomi Klein started to wrote about this, that in this process of neoliberalization, when the people are like slaves in maquiladoras in the world and everything is really bad as regards the working conditions and this capitalism, we are talking about homosexual marriages. This is nonsense.
But I'm saying, let's stop talking about it and let's just put it in law.
Well, you do, and it's good for you.
Yeah.
But in Slovakia, we don't want, and this is the difference. We want to respect our working class people, and our working class people don't want this. Want this.
I bet you would change your mind if it was one of your children.
But this is not the problem that we hate these people.
I'm not saying that either.
I'm telling that we want to respect them. They are equal. But we just don't want to have these transsexual marriages. We don't want to have this kind of adoption of the children. And Latin America, Asia, Africa, many countries in the world has the same opinion.
Sure.
Everybody should be like America or like Western Europe, probably not. It's kind of, mental imperialism.
Yeah.
Like if you have this in Great Britain, why we should follow you? Maybe we will not.
I understand. Yeah. Everybody should be entitled to their own sovereignty.
Exactly.
And their own sovereign mindset. Again, we will disagree, but anyway, my point is, I don't think it should be consuming enough people's time.
Exactly.
I think if you put it in the law and it's happened and then people don't talk about it anymore, then it should be bound in that, and then we can carry on with the regular stuff.
Exactly.
I want to come back a little bit. We've talked about Slovakia.
Yes.
We talked about imperialism. We talked about all sorts of interesting things. But let's talk a little bit about you. You mentioned President Čaputová.
Yeah.
And she, there are Facebook groups that are dedicated to you and all the hoaxes that you've said and all the claims that you've made. In fact, I couldn't even go through it. My research couldn't even go through it. Do you deliberately say things to antagonize people? Do you go out of your way to, you put the president's picture in a dustbin, and that could be seen as pretty disrespectful?
Well, you need to understand that we live in Slovakia.
Yeah.
If I live in Stockholm in Sweden, there is the different political culture. They don't have any Matovic or like people.
Yeah.
And in this situation, you don't need to use sometimes expressive words because the political culture is different. But in Slovakia, the starting of this political culture was maybe in 2010 when Mr. Matovic was coming to the parliament and has started to use the words like we are mafia, we are thieves, we are killers, murderers, we are everything bad. And then you need to respond. You can respond with this, dignity and the Swedish manner, but people are angry on this. Yeah. And then you have this big pressure from these liberal groups, like every other opinion is extremist. And you are like désolé if you are, for example, against the vaccination, or you are désolé if you are against the war in Ukraine, or if you don't hate Russians enough, and so on. You need to be extremist, désolé, and so on. This is something we need to refuse. Everybody has the right to speak, and that's why when we see this pressure from these liberal circles, it's the symbol of this circles is Mrs. Čaputová. Yeah. She is very progressive or progressivist politician, and she was the symbol of this. But there were others, the people who are trying to censor the media or the thinkers or the politicians who has different opinions. We refuse this, and that's why sometimes you need to use the more expressive language because they are using this. So it's kind of political culture in Slovakia. You need to respect this. This is the reality.
So I understand that, and we agreed also off air that everybody is entitled in a democracy, which is a wonderful thing, to express differing opinions, and then we walk away respectfully. I'm not sure it's respectful putting a picture of the president in a dustbin.
Not has been. It was the picture was to the wardrobe.
Putting it into the wardrobe, putting it away.
It was not anyway. It was undignified. It was absolutely normal, decent, like taking.
But it was filmed.
Picture.
Right?
Yeah, of course. It was a gesture. It was a gesture. It was kind of provocation.
Yeah.
But the provocation, well, I wouldn't say that in kind of more the most expressive way. It was like, okay, my symbol and the legend which who I wrote the book about is Ernesto Che Guevara.
Yeah.
So where is the problem when I give the picture of him as a symbol of fighting for freedom and the national liberation and the social justice, to put him on the wall? There is no problem. And Mrs. Čaputová, everybody in Slovakia knows that there is the big antagonism between she and me.
Yeah.
So why should be on the wall? There is no act, no law which
But you like to provoke, right?
Of course, you need to provoke sometimes in politicians because in politics, I mean, because.
But I think I get the impression that you relish almost the role of being an antagonist. We call it in the French, call it agent provocateur. And you've taken this role on. And I think, you mentioned polarization. Yeah. If I believe vaccinations are wrong, if I have that opinion, everybody else hates me. I also disagree with that. I believe vaccinations are right because if I break my leg, I go to a doctor. I don't go to someone on Facebook. To try and help me.
We were trying to follow the doctors like Mr. Lakota, who's very famous in Slovakia, who was against the vaccination, or Mr. He was the Nobel Prize laureate who was against.
Yeah, but again, there were so many opinions.
Yeah, exactly. So we were following our doctors, and you were following your doctors.
So I want to talk about you, though. But you like to provoke. You like to create a reaction. I think you enjoy it. I also do. I
would put it in another way. When they are provoking us, when they are
you see it just as retaliation.
Yeah, exactly. They are saying that
you don't go first.
I don't think so. They are saying that if you are left-winger, you are the bad communist, Bolshevik, and you need to be criminalized. That's what they are saying about the generation who were living in the communist regime. Sometimes I'm telling that, okay, in communist regime or the socialist regime, to be proper, there were many good things like the standard of living, like the people had the flats, people had the healthcare conditions, people had the schools, there was the factory in every region and so on. So many good things. Yeah. Also the mistakes. Yeah. Well, the freedom, the democracy and so on. But I'm saying that this is my opinion, and they are saying that you are the bad extremist Bolshevik, and they're trying to criminalize me. My reaction must be maybe from your side provocative, must be very tough. Yeah. We don't to be in the corner. We had the right for our opinions. And I think this is why people are following me, because I'm not afraid to say the things
other people are thinking.
Well, and to say it direct way, not like very diplomatic, but direct way.
Do you think, Lubos, and we can speak as men here? You're a family man too. You're a very proud family man.
Yes.
I spoke to Yarrow on my previous podcast, and with another lady, Romana Tabak, on another podcast. I generally don't think women are treated respectfully here in politics. Do you feel that you could have, if you could go back in time, maybe said something differently or been a little bit more delicate? Or do you feel that you used the right language when it came to the president?
I'm a believer of equity between the men and women. This is my principal opinion. And
I was pretty diplomatic, wasn't it?
Well, I think that the women who are in politics, they should be treated in the same way like the men. This is my opinion.
Sure.
For example, if you are saying that when I'm talking about Mrs. Čaputová, that she's an American agent,
which is rubbish.
You think that this is rubbish. I think that it's my opinion, and I think that there is a connection between she and some American NGOs who are placing the money to her. So it is something which I have the right to believe. And,
absolutely.
Well, and why? She cannot be blamed to be American agent on the one side. And for example, Mrs. Šimkovičová, who is the Minister of Culture now, can be criticized in a very rude way from the liberal media. Why? Why this hypocrisy?
I think in her instance, she's made claims about Slovak partisanship and patriotism, while I think she lives in Austria and her children go to school in Austria.
Again, now this formal way that they use the word of agent on Čaputová is the biggest criminal act in the history.
No, of course not.
But the using of really bad words on Mrs. Šimkovičová and
the media are also
exactly in formal way. This is hypocrisy. This is just
don't get me
hypocrisy.
wrong. The media amplify the situation on both sides. The media amplified the situation with the president, and we don't always know what the truth is because we only see what everybody else sees in the media. Then we have one comment from one party, one comment from, we actually don't know what the truth is. I don't believe Mrs. Simkovichova or the president should be, you said equity, that's fine, should be treated in any more disrespectful way. I think generally, though, female politicians as a rule should be treated with a little bit more courtesy.
Yeah, true. But still, if this is true, it should be true also on the women who are in the politics from political parties. SMER.
Yeah.
We have this experience of Mrs. Tomanova. Maybe you know, she
Yes,
was the Ministry of Labor before. And Mr. Baťo, he was one of the biggest liberal and biggest hater of me because I was trying to accuse of Mrs. Čaputová or some things. He was criticizing me, but he said about Mrs. Tomanova that she's looking like E.T. alien, like you know from this movie.
Yeah.
This is just rude. This is terrible.
It shouldn't be for anyone.
But you know, liberal coffee shops were like laughing. Oh, Mrs. Tomanova, she's bad. But when I'm trying to say not so rude words on Mrs. Čaputová, I'm saying the words
I think the language,
which is political. She's political agent.
Yep.
It means it's political explanation. It's nothing to do with some understand words.
I just think that it should be, the rules should be the same for everyone, and women generally should be treated with more respect. I mean, I'm a father to girls. And I wouldn't be happy if they were called aliens, if they were called
But still, I understand to you when we are talking about the girls and the ladies, when you are going to date, when you have the mother in your family or you have the wife, and so absolutely agree. But we are talking about politics.
Sure.
Politics is like a sport. It's a kind of ring when you are boxing.
Yeah.
And you cannot have the different rules for girls and different rules for boys. It is a ring of political ideas. Yeah. It cannot be like that.
So gloves off for everyone. So we shower in the same locker
For
rooms.
example, in Slovakia, we have a very funny politician. She's Mrs. Bito Ciganíková.
Yeah.
No offense. Yeah. She's very tough politician. She's screaming on the opposite people like, "Oh, you are such." Very bad words. Yeah. And then
Nadalki.
Exactly. And then, for example, the victim of these accusations from her side should be like a knight from the Middle Ages and saying that, okay, dear lady, you are so nice and good. No, you have the equality in politics, especially between the men and women, and we should respect it.
I agree. I think that the political environment here in the lead up to the election became a little bit like a circus. There's a lot of theatrics, a lot of activities that I would call not becoming of politicians. I'm not a big fan in politicians speaking openly on social media in a way, not just you, just in general. I understand that you get to speak to people in a direct, almost a direct to consumer.
Yeah.
But the fact is, once you touch someone, once you touch them, then they feel that, either they're an ally or an enemy. And it amplifies, again, that polarity. We're having these two desperately divided sides of the world.
I understand you, but still, again, I'm coming back to this idea that in Slovakia, the political culture is like this. And
should I respect it?
My first experience, I will tell you, my first experience in politics, in parliament was when I had a big speech in parliament, plenary session. And I was talking 45 minutes. That time it was 2012. I was younger. And 2 hours or 45 minutes I was talking about John Rawls, Alasdair MacIntyre, all the philosophers about social state, about inequalities in the world and so on, in an intellectual speech without any accusations, any bad words and so on. I stopped, and then Mr. Matovič, Mr. Miklos at the time, and other right-wing politicians say, "Oh, you are like bastard, you are Bolshevik, you are extremist." And I realized that when I will be intellectual in politics, it will be very easy target for these people who don't have any interest to have normal intellectual discussion at all.
So we should feel sorry for you.
No, it was just my changing was in the process.
Do you find refuge then in writing? Do you think that's your catharsis? So you get to step away from let's call it the maelstrom, the cauldron, the fire pot of politics, and then you find solace in writing your books. I mean, people remember you for the controversial things you say, but maybe people don't know that you're a published author. You've written 10 books. You've quoted my cousin in your book as well.
Tarigali. Yeah.
And do you find that you move away from politics to your books?
Sometimes, yes. You know, it's kind of relax when you are in this pressure. Then you need kind of relaxation. Sometimes somebody is using sports, somebody is using drinking or something. But I'm using the intellectual books, writing the scientific books, writing about Che Guevara, Lenin. I wrote a book Anti-Globalist about my ideas of this patriotic left, which is the idea we are trying to follow with Mr. Fico. So this is very important for me. It's kind of mental hygiene, but also it's kind of, in politics, sometimes you need to make compromises. For the people like me, it's not easy.
Yeah, I can see.
And sometimes the more compromises you have to do, the more relaxed or mental hygiene you are using. And that's why maybe I use this personality of Che Guevara in the last times, because sometimes you need to give some space to this idealism and to speak about the people who were refusing any kind of compromises in their political career, and this is very sympathetic. I cannot do that because we are in the different times, in different types of politics and so on. But still, kind of inspiration, it can be also from the people from the real politics. Why not?
Absolutely.
So this is why maybe I'm talking also about Lenin. He's controversial. I know that he's controversial, but still he wrote a beautiful philosophical text. We need to analyze. We need to maybe learn from this, that this was mistake. But learn that this was really interesting. His criticism of global capitalism and imperialism is still, impressive. So
absolutely.
Why not?
And that's education for education's sake.
Exactly.
We don't have to implement something just to appreciate its value at the time that it was written.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. Actually, interesting, completely Slovakia out of the picture for a minute. There's a lot of debate going around in the world now and this is this kind of pro-patria mentality of nationalism. You find the right is rising everywhere, perhaps less now in Poland. But in other countries, you see that nationalism is really coming to fruit. Do you think multiculturalism has failed?
Yeah, I think so. And but you are talking about nationalism, but you are using this word like in negative way. I'm trying to say it like in neutral way, like patriotism. Okay,
yeah. But they have different in English. They have different connotations. So patriotism is to be proud of your country. Nationalism is to progress the agenda.
This is kind of a media.
No, it's just language.
I read the book of Andrew Haywood. He's a big political theorist from your country. I mean, from Great Britain. So he wrote the political theory book, and he was talking about nationalism. He said liberal nationalism or civic nationalism when he was talking about Rousseau and this tradition. And this is something which is called today in media as patriotism. And he said also that there is kind of conservative of nationalism. And this is something which we are calling the nationalism. But still we can use this term in neutral way.
Sure.
And I'm trying to say, for example, leftist nationalism was in Latin America very popular. It was Perón. It was many other figures. So
Milei's come into power.
You can use this word also in neutral way. But okay, let's use patriotism because it's much more popular in media, and this is something we need to respect. Well, what is bad on patriotism?
Nothing. I asked you if you think multiculturalism has failed.
Well, I'm trying.
I'm not using Slovakia as an example. Look, if you look at the statistics, there are 278,000 foreigners that live in Slovakia. That's not so much. Okay, that's the third biggest city, of which 90% are white, European, Slavic.
And how many people live in Slovakia? Tell me.
How many?
5 million. 5.5 million. So we are not so big nation like France or Germany. You agree, yes?
Yeah. So, but the third lowest out of all the EU countries.
And don't you think that in the globalization times, when this multiculturalism is so popular in the West?
How is it multicultural if they're coming from Ukraine and Serbia?
I mean multiculturalism in a way that the Muslim culture, Confucian culture, the other cultures, not the typical.
There's no threat of that kind of multiculturalism.
I will tell you, like we see it in Slovakia, or many people see it in Slovakia. We are a fragile country, fragile nation, and we want to protect ourselves. This is our
and that
main
is the right of any sovereign nation, like Ukraine.
If we had, for example, the doctors or some students from the countries from Africa, from Asia in socialist times, there was no problem because it was like 1, 2, or 3 people. And I have many friends who are different religion or different ethnicity. But still, if we see the processes in Malmo or in French cities, in your country as well, and we see that there are the problems with this kind of multiculturalism, that there are the zones of the cities where only the people from the Arab countries are living, or Arab origins
integration
are living.
is a huge issue.
And this is issue in Slovakia. We see this and we are saying, okay, so strong welfare states like France or Germany cannot cope with this. And we, the poorer country, in the same situation, it would be disaster for Slovakia, and that's why we are refusing this model.
I don't disagree with that, but I don't see that there are 500 refugees currently, as of 2022, residing in Slovakia.
Well, this is the beginning of the process. We see it like salami method, salami method. Yeah. Like, okay, every time it started somewhere.
If someone's coming from Syria, or if someone's coming from Afghanistan, or someone's coming from Africa, and there's an opportunity to earn a wage higher than they could earn in Slovakia or benefit from a welfare country, they want to go to Switzerland, they want to go to Germany. Slovakia is not really a destination that many migrants...
So where is the problem?
I say there isn't a problem.
We are saying that we refuse them.
Yeah.
And the people in European Union are saying that, okay, let's take them. It was this idea of quotas. And we were opposing this. And... of course, they are
but
going
that's
everywhere.
linked to an EU stipend. There's a funding that comes with that, Lubos. You know that very well. Every country pays X amount, and then you have to adhere to the terms and conditions of the European Union.
Why we should be the victim of the imperial policies of the France and other countries in the past? Because this is the real problem.
Because you joined the European Union.
Well, but we joined the European Union as a sovereign state, which we which we want to have our own culture.
Sure.
And there was...
But I don't think...
In the European Union, there is nothing like that. You need to be multicultural.
You can look at me in the eye, Lubos, as a friend, and you can say to me, Zolf, I don't really think there's a real threat of a migrant crisis. And you can say that's down to good government.
No.
You can say that's down to good government. That's entirely up to you to say that. But I don't feel that there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of people clamoring from all around the world that say, I want to choose Slovakia as my end destination.
This is not this is of course the truth.
Yeah.
That the people who were coming here also in the migration crisis a few years ago were trying to go to Germany or to the richer countries, to your country as well. But still, there was the idea that these people will be redistributed also to the countries like Lithuania, Slovakia, or Finland, where nobody from these regions before lived. And this is very dangerous. We said that. And when we see also today, or it was like a few months or before the elections, a few months ago, that there were against the migration wave, and the government of Mr. Odor didn't do anything to protect the borders. We were saying, okay, we don't want to have these migrants. This is our position. But this is not the xenophobia, like, we hate them. We just don't want to have this model of multiculturalism like we see in the France, Sweden. And my one last idea. Remember the 70s or the 80s in Sweden. Mm-hmm. It started with a very beautiful idea like, let's help the people in Africa because they are poor. Beautiful idea. And even Sweden was not an imperialist country, like they had no colonies in Africa, like in France or like your country. But they make a humanistic gesture, like approach beautiful at the time. Maybe many dreamers were enthusiastic in this. But suddenly you have this situation now where you have gangs in Malmo, you have the problems with the multiculturalism, when even the left-wing peoples, working class people are voting for the far-right parties because they are terrified with this. This is what we want in Slovakia? Not.
No, it's definitely not. And I agree with you on that. But, in Sweden, they had a very clear plan that they said every refugee or anyone that came to their country had to be educated, had to learn the language, and had to be a taxpayer and a valuable part of society. So all of these Iranians and second generation people that came from the Middle East, they're all doctors, they're all bankers, they're all accountants, right? Things have happened.
They were, but their sons and daughters and
now things have changed.
This is the problem. The first move is maybe good, but then the other generations will be much more oriented against the culture which are they're in. They will be much more influenced by fundamentalism, for example.
But I'm a foreigner. I'm here.
But
am I helping your country? Am I taking away?
But you cannot say that we are generalize everybody. Like, okay, we are not xenophobes. As I said to you, we like people from the other cultures. For example, It is me who are defending Chinese or the Africans or the Latin Americans against the liberal imperialism from the America and Western Europe, because I respect their culture. I love them. But I don't love them to be here in a big group.
Community, okay.
But this is the same like in China. In China, you don't have the enclaves of white people or enclaves of Africans, because they are trying to protect their culture. I don't think that this is something, if you are, of course, not extremist, you cannot have this idea like poor country culture or something like that. No, we are just saying that.
Anyway, Slovakia is too small a country to adopt,
fragile.
and to adopt a multi refugee or a multi.
Many Slovaks are going also away.
Yeah.
Are going to Great Britain.
But tell me,
are going to France. We need to protect our community.
I find it ironic, and maybe you share this irony. Every time we travel to Austria, you're going to Austria today with if I give you time, with your family to enjoy the Christmas market. So I won't keep you so much longer. But this is a fascinating conversation anyway.
No problem.
When I travel to Austria, often you can be stopped at the border in Austria, right? So that you have to go through. But when you come to Slovakia, there's no check. My concern is that if there's a strong stance on protecting one's borders, tell me why. I'm now a Slovak resident. I pay my taxes here. I have Slovak kids in school. Why isn't there someone checking on the Slovak side?
Well, our target.
I know Schengen is the greatest European construct, greatest political construct of modern.
Exactly.
We should have
the reason. We want to follow the Schengen.
But we should be screening too. And now I'm speaking like a Slovak. I don't want an open door just for everyone to come in.
Well, first of all, the problem is not the movement
it's the
of
drugs
people.
coming. It's the alcohol. It's
the problem is not the movement of people in the European
trafficking.
Union. The problem is the migration from the countries who are from Syria, from Northern Africa and other countries, who has first of all different culture. This is a problem. Also, there is a problem or social or economic press on our markets or our labor markets, because they are trying to push on this, and also. I don't see any connections between the borders which should be open in the Schengen and the protection of the external border of the European Union. And this is the failure. When I remember the times when Hungarian Prime Minister, which is hated in the European centers, was trying to protect the Hungarian border with any means. Everybody was criticizing him. It was in this migration crisis, but he was trying to do his best to follow the rule, because the border should be protected. And suddenly he was the monster. Now everybody is telling that, okay, let's protect the external border of the European Union. It's a hypocrisy again. And I understand that in the politics in Germany or in France, there are so many minorities and so many people from different ethnicities. You should be much more, diplomatic. Diplomatic in their speeches. I understand this. But in Slovakia, we have different speech because we are trying to protect our citizens. It's our right. And again, it's not xenophobia. We are, again, not against you and other people. For example, I am writing the books about Jewish, Arabic, Chinese authors, and I really love them. It's not problem.
Do you think it would change if there was lots of money in Slovakia?
Oh, well, I think that there are some national tradition, which are going to
because the Czechs are always often a benchmark, right? We work quite closely with the Czechs and the Czech government, and I've been very grateful to spend lots of time in Prague, one of my favorite cities. I've also
Prague is beautiful. Yeah,
also had the opportunity to work closely with the Hungarian government, Budapest, another one of my favorite cities in the region, and I see different mindsets a little bit.
No, you see it in Prague.
I see it in Prague.
Let's go to countryside. It's the same like in Slovakian countryside.
But it seems a little bit like in Prague that there is this idea of we don't really care as long as we're happy.
This is the problem of difference between the big cities and the countryside.
It's the same in the UK.
Same in London. Probably when you are going to some little
villages,
shire in England, it's different than it is in London, in the center of London. The same is in Prague, same is in Bratislava, in Budapest, in Warsaw. But in countryside, the people are different. Yeah. And in America, in the United States, New York is probably very different than Alabama.
Yeah,
so
sure.
That's why we need to respect that. Especially the working class people, the poor people from the countryside or the towns and the villages. So there are different opinions than, sometimes, middle class young people who want to go to coffee shop, to bar. It's probably they are maybe libertarian, they are culturally very progressive, but still maybe when they will be more adult, and they will have the family and the children, they will understand that if you have the family and children, your priority is not the transsexual toilet. The priority is the protection of your children, and sometimes even protection of borders and the social, security. And this is also the process of in my adulting, I would say. Before, yes, I was on this pride, but I was very young. I was young and I was a libertarian socialist. But now I'm much more patriotic socialist who's much more respecting this family values, these nation values, and so on. This is the process. I think everybody who is older and older, and this is very interesting that younger people are following very usually in Slovakia in big cities liberal and progressive ideas. But the older people are voting for SMER or the social democratic and patriotic parties. This is again. They are much more experienced. I mean, the older people, they have families and they know that they need some social security and some national security.
Or do you feel that the older generation likes to be governed?
No, not so much.
In a more autocratic fashion.
I think young generation is much more manipulated than the older generation.
I mean, if you take Brexit as a microcosm of how it changed the UK, it was this divide. The whole world nowadays is about dividing two opinions, and no one in the middle anymore. It's like,
yes.
It's a horrible
globalist or anti-globalist.
Yeah, and you can exist in the middle, but the people in the middle are hated because they're not either on either side. Yeah. If you look at, for me, it's like I find it fascinating. Is it Fedor Flashik that created this idea of Mečiars, Babkas, and having an autocratic gentleman who is very powerful, well-spoken, educated, looks like he can cuddle your country with authority. We see that again also with Mr. Fico. You find that he is a dominant character. He's respected, isn't he, by these older people?
Well, how it is with Mr. Macron, the progressive icon in France. He's a cult of personality as well. It's not about this. The politics in any countries is going to be much more personalized.
But
so you are true. But it's not only the older generation kind of inclinations. Yeah. It's everywhere. Mr. Šaputová, Mr. Kiska in Slovakia. Yeah. It was the cult of personality by liberal media for them. So my idea is different.
Okay.
I think in Catholic countries or in Slavic countries as well, and in Central Europe, absolutely. You have this kind of caudillism, like it is in Latin America. I'm writing about this in my book on Che. We need strong personalities. Yes, this is true. I
think you need strong leadership.
Yes, you don't have these programmatic parties like it is SPD in Germany or like in Great Britain, the Labour Party. So this is maybe the true, but still, it's not the issue only of all the generation. It's the issue also of the young generations. They are very, very much manipulated by their leaders. I think they are much more following the liberal media.
This is the only country that I've ever lived in
than older people. So that's my idea, that there is no difference between inclinations to leadership by older or younger generation. The truth is, then in Slovakia, in Hungary as well, in Poland as well, Mr. Tusk is a good example, but also in other countries, Slavic countries, you also have these leaders, these strong leaders, and the question is if it is bad or good. I don't think that it need to be bad.
I'm in a unique position because I grew up in the United Kingdom. I was born in London. I've seen one way of a system. I was fortunate to live also in America. In fact, when I was living in America, it was the year that we had the hanging Chad. It was 2000. So I saw how Americans like to make their politics into a sport. I lived in the Middle East, in the UAE, and I saw how a benevolent dictatorship or an effective system of rule, which is a monarchical system of rule. And all of those have negatives. All of those have positives. One question I've always wanted to ask, and this is just a personal question. I've been in the same room as him a couple of times. Is Mr. Fico scary? Yeah. He looks scary to me.
Oh, no.
He looks really scary. He looks always angry.
You would be very surprised. Right. Maybe you are surprised also of me, because in medias you have the articles like he's a monster, he's the fanatic, and he will kill you when you will be in the same room like we are together now. The Mr. Fico is even sweeter than I am. Really? you would be very surprised. Well, he's so big gentleman to women, for example, and
he is very
so silent and so nice to you if you are talking with him in personal manner. But well, you are in politics, and when you are in politics, you are the target of many aggressive attacks, especially Mr. Fico. All the liberal media, all the television, everybody in television is against him. So he need to protect themselves or himself. He need to be strong on these responses.
But he looks scary.
Well, for me, not. He looks
Well,
very
because
persuasive and convincing.
No, I understand enough Slovak to know that he's always respectful. Even when we watch the television, my wife always says he speaks eloquently, that he never raises his voice, he's never alarming. She might not agree with anything or everything that he says, but she does say that, from what I can understand, he never really goes into fights that are inappropriate, uses the right language. But to me, just as a person, he looks kind of scary. He commands this aura about him. You don't think?
This is not true. Well,
I'm a foreigner, so for me, it's interesting.
I can tell you that before I knew him personally, I never think that he's scary in any way. I was really. It was from.
I don't think I've ever seen him smile. That's why.
Well, when I was maybe 18 years old when he started to be prime minister. It was very when I was very young, and I remember he was a big inspiration for all the generation of my generation of left-wing people. Because he can be such convincing. He can be. His charisma is really. Maybe you can't say it because you are English speaking,
but I can see it.
His language, his performances are so charismatic, and especially he can be convincing because Slovak people. Maybe this is the true also for other Slavic nations. We don't love this too much diplomatic persons. Like you are like princess, so you are like marquis. No, you need to be very very typical ordinary man, and typical ordinary men are saying also sometimes more expressive.
I'm going to disagree with you here because every time there's a state secretary that comes to our office or we go to an event, you have to stay state secretary, and
well, in official
but if you go
relations, I understand.
But if you go to the UK, you call the minister by his name. If I saw Boris Johnson and he wouldn't call prime minister, you'd say Boris. You would,
Boris Johnson is a good example.
But there's politicians. You work for us, right?
Yes.
You work for the people.
Yeah, absolutely true. And you sometimes need to be together with people and in mindset. This is very different, big difference.
But I think here it's not. I think politicians think that they're more important than they should be.
Well, this is not the issue of Mr. Fico or me.
Yeah.
Yes, we are true that there are politicians who are like class itself.
Yeah.
They are really posh. And this is I really disagree.
Yeah.
But still, we are not in the level like Boris Johnson, like with his funny hair and so on. We need to follow some kind of formal, like
pattern.
using this and formal pattern. But in typical humankind relationships, we are much more, I would say, normal, much more normal. Like when I'm coming to the pub in typical Slovak language, or Mr. Fico is going to the pub in a typical Slovak language, everybody can talk.
Will you invite me to the pub next time you go with Mr. Fico? Yeah, please.
No problem. No.
Yeah.
Well, in countryside, it's no problem.
Okay.
In Bratislava, it's a problem because Bratislava is aggressive. Bratislava is aggressive, especially their mindset is very, very progressive. As you said, globalist in an aggressive, fanatic way. And if you are Fico or Blaha with different opinions, you should be criminalized. You should be in prison or in concentration camp, maybe. So this is very dangerous.
I can tell you, I have a small social media following. Well, not so small now. I have a pretty good social media following now, and my aim is to help tell the story of Slovakia to the world. That's my job. I'm trying to help Slovakia. But I made a comment the other day, and I said kofola is horrible. I said it tastes like cheap Coke, but I knew that it would provoke a reaction. And you know what was very fascinating to me is that it taps into the national psyche. I knew that it was a Czechoslovak drink.
Yeah, it was very popular. Yeah.
And I knew that it was created because there was a surplus of caffeine. Yeah. And I knew that it wasn't a competition to Coke, but it was because Coke existed in the Western world that they wanted a soft drink in the region. And the amount of hatred I have now, just because I said, I don't like kofola, is crazy. And then I said to them,
I don't think that this is only about this patriotism. It is maybe one of the reasons, but also that it's funny because Kofola is so good.
No, but Vinea. I love Vinea.
I don't drink, for example, Coke for 20 years because it's a symbol of imperialism. But but I don't like it.
Coke can?
I don't like it. It's so sugar. There is so much sugar in Kofola. There is also many sugar.
Yeah, I called it Sedlak Coke.
Yeah,
I called it Sedlak Coke.
I would say that the Coke is tasting like cheap Kofola.
Both of them are terrible. You'll say both of them are.
This is the truth.
Both of them are very bad for your health. But I was like you. I said something controversial, and I said it's Sedlak Coke just to see what the response would be like. And it's really crazy because the rest of what I said was that I love chalamada, I love horčica, I love vinea, I love so much Slovak, I love lokša. There's so many great things in the cuisine here. Yeah. But the one thing that I said I didn't like, or it became now this like the amount of hate that you get. So I know now that we live in a society that you can't hate something without everybody wanting to shoot at you for not expressing that.
That's true.
But you promised me that we'll go to the pub in the country with Mr. Fizzo.
Oh, no problem. Together with Mr. Fizzo.
Yeah, us three together.
If he's not busy,
No,
but
I'm
he's the
kidding.
prime minister. But we can take him and let's go. I don't know how long you live here, but
7 years.
7 years.
Sedem
And
rokov.
have you been in countryside?
Yes, my wife is from Košice. I've been to
Great.
Žilina, I've been to Rimavská
Still,
Sobota.
there are
I've been-
still towns. Let's
Yeah.
go to these very, very small towns or the villages.
Yeah.
Go to the pub and speak with the people. You will see the different world than these coffee shops in Bratislava, because the people here in Bratislava, the young people especially, they have this, scholarship somewhere in Prague or somewhere in Frankfurt or in London. They are mentally somewhere else than Slovak nation is, and that's the reason why I'm really.
Do you think there's a big disconnect?
This
But
is-
that's the EU money is meant to regionalize, right? So the whole point of the large, and Mr. Kometz is doing a great job with the EU fund disbursement, is to help the regionalization of the country. This is a huge problem.
Economically, yes. Economically, we need to follow this model, but still mentally, I mean, ideologically or culturally, we need to protect our culture. This is my point. Well, Mr. Philosopher Jürgen Habermas, he was talking about colonization of the living sphere. When capitalism, liberalism is going to dominate on you so much that you are forgetting that you are from Slovakia, you have family, you have some connections, some community, it's dangerous. This is something which I want to also say to my compatriots in Slovakia. We need to fight not against liberalism because it's bad, but we need to protect our culture, and this is something which is very, very important.
I think protecting culture is an important thing. I think for me, it's like finding an identity, what that path looks like, and then sticking to it. I see it from the business side here in Slovakia. I see what the companies want. They communicate to us what they need, and not much of it's Europe-based. It's like, how do we get into bigger markets?
Sometimes it's much more than this individualism or this rationalism in
Sure.
you. And for example, the good example is now the Palestinian war or the war in Gaza. There are people of Arab origin or Palestinian origin in the Western Europe. I absolutely understand. They need to be furious when the Israel is killing them, making genocide on Gaza with this pretext that there was the terrorism. Of course, that there was terrorism. It's horrible what Hamas did. But still, they are dying like 10,000 people.
It's the same as
this
what's
is
happening
terrible.
in Ukraine. So there's a different value.
But on the other side,
No, because the International Court of Justice is investigating in Ukraine at extensive level. There's, 45,000 cases open, but there's not the same scrutiny in Israel.
and the same America, which is criticizing Russia, making the sanctions on Russia,
is
supporting Israel. So hypocrisy
is everywhere.
Yeah, but this is something which is very important for Slovak people. Yeah. We don't follow this hypocrisy. But again, in this issue of identity, Slovak people, especially the people from the countryside, in their identity, especially in the older generation, is kind of pro-Russian stances. This is the truth of Slovakia, because they are speaking Russian, they love Russian culture, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. They know, like many younger generation people do not, that it was the Red Army, and especially the Russian nation, which liberated us from the fascism in the Second World War. So I understand this emotion. And when they see that the Americans and the Westerners are trying to push this really even racist Russophobia, they just refuse it. And that's not the reason why they are pro-war. They want peace. Yeah. They want peace for Ukrainians. But the first step for peace is to make a compromise, make a agreement, and not to war to giving the money to Ukraine. This is not the
But
solution.
again, it's like Russophilia versus Westernization. I don't think there's a middle ground here, and I think that again, that's where the struggle that Slovakia finds itself in, is that there are people that may share your opinion, or have educated people that share your opinion. You may have people who share the American ideology or Western notion that anti-Russophilia is the way forward. I'm not sure where I sit in either of those camps. I just don't want any more war anywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway,
but maybe I am one of the example. I'm writing my books, which are influenced by American authors, British authors, French authors.
I mean, maybe people don't realize that about you, that you take your inspiration.
But of course, you can. But also from Russian authors and Chinese authors.
Of course.
So, and this is the
we
problem.
can't cancel history.
Yeah, exactly.
And we shouldn't cancel history. We shouldn't take down our edifices. We shouldn't remove statues. We shouldn't take authors out of studies just because they had a different opinion.
That's true. And this woke culture, which is in the United States, like, I don't like, for example, Winston Churchill in many ways because he's making some kind of bad things in Bangladesh or in Dresden and so on. But still, I understand that he's a respectful leader of the Great Britain in such times, and he was fighting against fascism. So let's speak about him. I cannot understand why the left-wing leaders in our region are so hated. Mr. Novomesky, Mr. Clementis, even Mr. Husak. Yeah. He's controversial in some ways, of course, but let's speak about him. About Winston Churchill. I was so shocked when the historians in Slovakia were blaming Che Guevara that he was the mass murderer. Yeah. It's so nonsense.
Well, you have to read.
He was partisan. He was guerrilla.
Well, you should read Tariq Ali's book on Winston Churchill. It's a very interesting read. It goes against the values of his family, but or the benefits that his family profited from, but very anti-Churchill in its sense. But look, that's the beauty of opinion. We're entitled to.
I wouldn't never
take him,
liquidate the statute or cancel the statute of Winston Churchill. This is terrible, just terrible. Yeah. So we need to, in Slovakia, have much more respect also to the figures in our history who are controversial. This is my idea, because if England can do this, if even France can have the memorial of Napoleon, who was the conqueror of Europe, and because of him maybe 3 million people died. I think that we can have also kind of little statue of Mr. Husak in his place when he was born, for example.
We cannot eradicate history. I'm a big believer. Anyway, Ľuboš, I'm understand that time is short for you. Okay. Christmas is around the corner, or when this is released, probably a little bit after. I want to say thank you. Many people told me not to do this podcast, but as I always say, if someone says don't do it, I'm going to do it.
It will be more hated than for this Kofola.
That's okay. I don't mind the hate. I'm a very firm believer that you have to have an opinion from every side of the spectrum. Whether we disagreed on many things today, but we will leave friends.
Of course.
And that's the most important thing. So on that note, I would like to thank Lubos Blaha for joining me here, Vice Chairman of the National Council of the Slovak Republic and prominent member of the Social Democratic Party, SMER SD. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed talking to you, author, father. One last question. Well, you're a father and you're always in the firing line and you're a married man. Yeah. Are your family ever afraid that you say things that can put them in jeopardy?
Yes, of course. And this is
You don't think about it when you do it?
Well, my father learned me to be tough on my opinions and very principled.
And to stick up for yourself.
And I'm trying to say the same to my children. So I hope that they will be inspired by this kind of rebellion.
But do they not get people at school saying things about you?
Yes,
it's not easy.
Sometimes not easy. For example, when this conflict on Ukraine started, under my windows, there were these progressive, decent people who are screaming on me that let's go here and we will kill you and your family and so on. So it was not easy times, but still, well, I believe in some ideas and I want to follow them. And what should I go? Should I
hide? Yeah.
This is, I think, in democratic politics, we should be much more respectful. And it's not easy for my family. Now I will have this third child.
Yeah. Congratulations.
So, thank you very much. And it will be not easy time, I can tell you. It's not easy. But still, my inspiration is Che Guevara, and Che Guevara was tough. So let's be tough as well in Slovakia. And when we are trying to say goodbye, so I need to use my typical venceremos.
Venceremos, okay, we shall prevail. Muchas gracias. Ha sido un gran placer.
Great.
It's been a great pleasure talking to you, Ľuboš. Thank you very much for joining us here today on Undiplomatic, and I look forward to speaking to you in the future, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You have been listening to the Undiplomatic podcast, brought to you by Hyatt-Khan.